All right. And with that, hey, Sylvia, welcome to the Survival Podcast.
Thanks, Jack. I'm glad to be here. I've been looking forward to this.
Well, I'm glad to have you on. This is a great topic to discuss. It's not a great topic to have experience with, but it is a great topic of a discussion. We haven't really gone into it for quite a while. We're going to talk about home invasions today. Can we start out, though, with who is Sylvia? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, Sylvia is a prepper, kind of. I consider myself kind of an unenthusiastic prepper. I do things because it makes sense to do it and because it's the responsible thing to do. I'm not all into the gear and the camping and the hunting and the fishing, but I'm all about food and having plenty of that, and water, and of course, self-defense and the ammo that goes along with that. I started listening to the Survival Podcast, I think in 2010. I was laid off from a job and had time on my hands and had become more aware of the need to be prepared. Things like, Hurricane Katrina was one thing that made me be more inclined to be prepared, and just various other things. So that's kind of how I found out about you. And as soon as you opened up the members support brigade to lifetime members, I took advantage of that. So I've been a lifetime member for many years. I don't even remember when that was.
That's over 8 years, because it was right before we moved here from Arkansas. So the only reason the numbers in my head is I know that in January it'll be 9 years in this house. That's the only reason I know that. So yeah, that's almost a decade as a lifetime member. That's awesome. So unfortunately, you ended up with a home invasion scenario. Tell us kind of the circumstances of what exactly happened there.
This is when I lived in Clearwater, Florida, which is in the Tampa Bay area. I had moved into a new house from another little town in that same area. And just kind of, like I mentioned, I'm sometimes prepper or a kind of prepper. So when I moved into this house, as it always is with moving, things were chaos. Somebody who was helping me out put my guns somewhere. I think it was in the garage, and that's where they stayed. So when I had lived there for a few months, one night I woke up and it was a really weird thing because I was groggy, but yet I just knew I was awake. So I got up and started walking out of my bedroom. And as I turned the corner to go into the hallway, I saw a figure standing there, and it looked like they had on a hoodie. And of course, I was unarmed because my guns were in the garage. So I did the only thing I could do and started screaming bloody murder. And I can scream loud. And so this figure just kind of disappeared. And I went back into the bedroom, grabbed my phone from the nightstand, called 911, went through all of that. Cops came out in droves, 5 or 6 cars. They checked the house, nothing. They had a dog. Could not find any scent of a human being in the yard, no signs of a break-in. And so the conclusion was that I was just dreaming. So very disturbing. No follow-up from that case from the police. So fast forward about a year later. And before I fast forward, though, let me tell you that the next day I located all of the guns, the ammo, the gun. From that point on, lived in its appropriate place. So fast forward a few months later, I'm laying in bed. Now, I have had trouble sleeping for a while, even before the first incident. Well, after that, when I had even more trouble sleeping. So when I do finally fall asleep, a lot of times I sleep pretty soundly for a few hours. But anyway, so a few months later, I was laying in bed asleep, and I heard this god-awful noise. So I got the gun, got out of bed, went through the house checking, nothing. Went back to bed, My heart rate had almost returned to normal when I heard another god-awful noise. So grabbed the gun again, got out of bed, and as I was leaving my bedroom door, I saw a figure turning down the hallway. And it was really bizarre because this was a middle-aged woman carrying one of those like Yeti cups or coffee cups. And it looked like she was just strolling through the house like it was her own. Like, you know, she got up and was having her first cup of coffee in the morning. So, of course, I had the gun in her face and I said, "Don't move or I will shoot." And she just stopped and said, "I believe you." I'm like, "Who are you?" She told me her name, Christina Smith. I'm like, "What are you doing in my house?" She said that she followed her friend in and she thought it was another house, but apparently it wasn't. I'm like, "How did you get in?" The garage door was open. I'm like, anyway, at that point, it's like, okay, enough of the question. So I knew it was time to call 911, but the phone was over on my nightstand. So I told Christina to turn around. Well, first I told her to put her coffee cup down or whatever it was because I didn't want her sloshing something at me, you know, and distract me. So I told her to put that down. Then when I was trying to get to the phone, I told her to turn around and face the wall and put her hands up against the wall up above her head. When she did that, I, you know, stepped over, grabbed my phone, came back so that she was in view again. Now, this woman was very compliant through this entire thing. And so it was just bizarre. And that dissonance was going on because when you have somebody break in your house, you don't expect it to be a compliant middle-aged woman. You expect, you know, younger. And so I felt really calm from the very beginning, pissed, but very calm. It was just really bizarre. But anyway, I called 911 and they started asking their questions. Oh, who was it, the age, what she was wearing, all of this, you know. But I made sure I told them that I did have a gun in my hand. So hopefully they're a little bit quicker. I don't know. But anyway, I stood there talking to the 911 call with Christina standing there in front of me doing whatever I told her to do. And I had backed away from her as much as I could. So my back was against the dresser, which was against the far wall, because I know how quickly people can move. And I didn't want her rushing at me and me not have time to, you know, react and pull the trigger if I needed to. So I'd thrown the phone down on the bed because trying to hold a gun and a phone at the same time. And after a while, the gun gets heavy. This was a Glock 9mm. I think it's the Glock 19. But anyway, so the phone was on speaker, laying on the bed in front of me, and the 911 operator was asking questions. I said, "I don't know." But then she answered and said, "Oh, I think it was 49, whatever." So it's just a bizarre situation. But then after so long of these questions, I'm like, are you sending somebody to help me out with this situation?
Yeah,
and she's
no
like,
shit.
"Yeah,
Like, come on. Like, I've got a gun
Yeah.
pointed at somebody and you're interviewing me.
Right. But it was, she said they're on their way, just hang on. And then, you know, there was some silence after that. I was still on the line. She told me to stay on the line and then would come in, you know, a couple of times saying, "What's going on now?" or whatever. But then finally she said, "Okay, the cops are there. Can you go to the front door and let them in?" I'm like, "No, I can't, because I would have to walk by this woman and turn my back to her." So I said, "I will have her go to the door and unlock it. So she's going to be coming out first. And I'm going to follow her to the door. And as I walk by this clothes hamper that was sitting in my hallway, I'm going to put the gun down because I was afraid of being shot by the police if they came in and saw me holding a gun. You just never know. So that's kind of what happened. And I looked later at my phone, and the 911 conversation lasted 7 minutes and 28 seconds, which I believe is a pretty quick response time overall.
That's under their 10-minute national average.
Yeah.
That's,
yeah.
And that's 10-minute national average where they show up, right?
Right.
There are places where you might still be standing there, right?
Exactly.
Today, like if it was Seattle or something. This friend that she mentioned, did you ever figure out if the friend was real or imaginary or bullshit? Like, because my concern in that scenario is I think I have two invaders here. Where's the other one? And the scenario you describe, I'm thinking dude. I'm thinking other guy, the other person's a dude, and this is probably like a couple that's strung out on drugs or something. They're looking to score some quick money. Like, or was that just some fabrication? Did this person just have like a mental deficiency, or what were you able to discern from all this by the time it was over?
Well, I think there was a slight mental deficiency to cause the situation to begin with, but there was a friend, and at some point she had mentioned the friend by name. I think it was Rachel, but the friend was not there. And that is one thing that I thought of later. It's like, I would have been toast if there had been probably a male, like if there had been somebody coming in one of the bedroom windows while I had my gun pointed at her. I mean, hopefully I would have reacted and been able to take care of the other situation. But obviously one person is at a disadvantage if there are two intruders. But I did feel better because she was so compliant and because she had mentioned a female name. And back at that point, a female name usually meant a female, unlike what it does now. But the female friend never came into the house. She apparently helped Christina break in, but when the cops came, they did find some person wandering around the streets and detained her and did ascertain that it was the friend that this woman was talking about. But they did not arrest her because she was not in the house and they couldn't prove anything.
Did you ever determine a motivation? I mean, obviously, if you're caught like that, the best thing you can do is keep your mouth shut. If you're this girl, right? But did you ever determine a motivation? Was it an attempted burglary? Was it they didn't think anybody was home and they were just going to hang out in the house and smoke dope? I mean, like, because there's a lot of that happens where people go into a house because they think no one's home or they think it's actually deserted and they just like flop for a while, or did this person look like maybe she's trying to score drug money? Like, do you have any idea what the motivation was?
No. And the cops told me later that they could not get anything that made sense. I don't know if they maybe knew the person that lived there before me and thought that maybe they did think that the house was empty, even though I had lights on in the bedroom, because a lot of times I'll fall asleep with a light on. I more than likely had one on. But anyway, they never did find out why. She apparently was on drugs, and the only thing that made any sense is that this neighborhood that I lived in was kind of marginal. It was right on the borderline between not so great and then in a nice part. And so there was a little neighborhood bar that was a block or so away that I think she and the friend were there. And then when it closed, they probably hung out and smoked some weed a little while and then got the bright idea of roaming to my house and trying to break in. But no, the story never made sense.
No, it doesn't, but it does. I mean, it doesn't, but it does. That kind of crap happens all the time. People just pick a house and wander into it because their faculties aren't there, or they think they know the occupant, or maybe they do know the occupant 3 streets over and they're in the wrong house. I mean, this kind of thing happens, and it sucks, but it beats the alternative. Like, they weren't coming in there to try to do violent harm to you or what have you, but I mean, you have somebody come into your house that doesn't belong there. It is a traumatic experience. You were armed. Did you just go get a gun? Did you go get a gun and take a class? How do you feel being armed and whatever training you may have had played out in keeping this situation like under control and keeping your confidence where they needed to be?
Well, I have had training in the past. I do not train nearly as much as I should, but I did years ago when I lived in Memphis, Tennessee, or in that area. I went to tactical response and took the fighting pistol class. So I was very familiar with the gun, and I had shot thousands of rounds through the gun with that and with, target practice, whatever. So just handling the gun, I felt very confident, and that came back to me. Now, I don't know how well I would have aimed if I had to pull the trigger. I'm assuming it was such close distance that I would have eventually been able to hit before I ran out of bullets. But just the handling of the gun, somehow that came back to me. And I was just amazed about how calm I was and how I was able to hold the gun, keep it steady, keep my finger off the trigger, and hold the phone and the gun at the same time, and even did some other stuff without shooting Christina or myself by accident. So I think the training definitely paid off. But if there had been multiple people, I'm not sure that I would have been able to manage both at the same time. But definitely having the gun probably prevented me from, rolling on the floor brawling with this woman, like having a cat fight with her, because who knows what she would have done. So I definitely think.
I think the best response you can get from somebody that you point a gun at and say, if you don't comply with me, I'm going to shoot you, is I believe you. Right. That was probably the point at which she decided, whatever this lady tells me to do, I'm going to do it. Because you would expect three possible scenarios to play out. One, she engages with you in fights, even despite the fact you're armed. 2, compliance. And 3, runs away. Like, makes the calculation. I don't think this person's going to shoot me in the back when I run out the door. Right. And most people won't, but you live in certain states like Florida or Texas. It's not that you can't, it's that we tend not to want to do such things if we don't have to. But I think I believe you if anybody ever points a gun at you and says you're gonna be shot if you don't comply, I think I believe you is a pretty good response from the person on the other end to bring things down, which sounds like it happened. It sounded like this one is as well as it could have under the circumstances.
Most definitely.
What people don't understand about this type of scenario is, let's say there are multiple people. You're sitting there with a 9mm. Let's say you actually do everything right. You put 2 shots into each person during a confrontation. You know what we teach people to expect? And I know since you went through James Yeager's course, you know this. What we teach you to expect when you shoot somebody with a handgun to happen is nothing, right? We don't expect that's going to stop. It often does, but it just as often doesn't. Like, it's amazing how much damage a person mortally wounded, let alone superficially wounded, with a handgun can do. So it is a bad, tight-fitting scenario. Like you said, if that other person had been a male and it simply, when they heard that initial go on, set up to ambush you, it could have been really, really bad for you. It could have been really, really bad for them. So I think having the training is a huge thing. I don't like to pick on people that were in a situation I wasn't, but I think we should probably talk about some of the things that you could have done better for the audience's sake. And one seems like, if you get up in the night and you need your gun, you should probably take your phone with you. And that was a scenario that you kind of off balance, correct?
Right. Yes. And again, it was another thing that I don't think people realize is, even when you are alert, or you think you're alert, when you wake up from a sleep, you really probably aren't. You may be able to function physically, but mentally you may not be quite awake yet. And so waking up from the sleep, you may not think of the phone because I didn't. It was just like noise, gun, and that's as far as I thought, if you can even call that thinking. It was more like just reacting. But yes, I think that from now on, if I hear a noise, I would definitely grab the gun and the phone, especially now that you've mentioned it. But yeah, that's one thing that people, I think, might need to think about, is just how little you may be actually thinking if something like that happens when you wake up from being asleep. And you wonder, did I really hear that noise, or was I dreaming and just woke up for some reason? It's really kind of a blurry thing. But you're definitely right that taking the phone with you would be a very good idea.
With the whole, did I hear something or not? Some people don't like dogs. Some people prefer not to have them. Some people don't have the space in their life for them. But can you see maybe the security advantage if you had, I mean, even a little yappy Pomeranian or something here? Because my experience with dogs has been they're never wrong, right? When they say something's up, it might be a field mouse or it might be a person. But when they say, dude, something's going on there, they're never wrong. And like, to me, I think that might be something that people should consider. Like, we just had Joel Riles on a couple weeks ago, and he talked about like trained protection dogs that are designed to like, okay, go eat that dude's hands off so he doesn't bother anybody, and then stop when I tell you to. And that's great if you have that. And dogs like that are expensive. And let's be honest, the dog has a timeline that they're useful in that capacity. But just the general concept of dogs don't like people that don't belong in their house, and they let you know about it. How do you kind of feel about that?
I definitely think that that's a wonderful idea, and I have been considering that. And in fact, I've actually communicated with Joel, but I'm not quite ready to pull the trigger because it is quite expensive. But I do want an animal that is trained, because I have 2 useless eaters, otherwise known as house cats, that I don't want the dog eating. My 86-year-old mother, that I moved here to be closer to her, sometimes she's at my house, and I want a dog that is not going to be underfoot enough and trip her up. So I definitely want a trained dog, but I don't feel I'm qualified to train it myself, because and I don't have the time or the desire to train one myself. So I'm considering going the Fortress Canine route, but again, I'm not quite ready to pull that trigger because of the expense. To me, that seems the best way, because I want this dog to be a weapon, and I want for it to be trained, and trained right. Again, because of people in my house and things like that, I just can't have an untrained large dog, and I do want a large one.
Well, and I think if you're worried about underfoot and all that, actually is better. Big dogs are easier to not trip over. They kind of like, you bounce off them, you glance off them. It's little dogs that, especially with an elderly parent, are more likely to actually trip somebody up or what have you. I was just wondering about that. Are there any other things you would do differently or have plans for the future? Have you thought about like an alarm system or something like that? As far as getting the police to come, I think that, you're pretty lucky on the response time you got, and sometimes alarm response is even worse. But the fact that the thing goes off is a deterrent. Like, criminals that do invasion scenarios, they rely on stealth, whether they want to get in and out without you knowing, cat burglar style, or whether they want to get in and harm you. They still rely on stealth. They don't generally, open the door and go, "Hey, I'm coming in to steal your stuff," right? So, like, have you thought about like an alarm?
Yes, I have thought about an alarm, and I actually bought an online, like, I think it's Simply Safe. Did not put it up in Florida because circumstances made me realize that I would be moving soon, like with my mother, and get out of the large city, all of that. So, and again, I'm kind of, I guess, lazy when it comes to things like that, and just maybe kind of in denial too, because I was kind of surprised at how much this incident affected me. Usually things like or most things just kind of roll off of me, and I cope with hard situations fairly well. But this really, really did affect me more than I thought it would. Like not sleeping, and still sometimes I wake up and just kind of in a panic. And I know that there is nothing there, but I have to talk to myself and calm myself down before I can go back to sleep. But yes, an alarm is definitely a good idea. I'm terrified, though, of waking up in the middle of the night with an alarm blaring and being even more disoriented than I would be before, and not hearing what I need to hear and things like that. So I probably will do the alarm soon, but I definitely think a dog is something that I would rather have. Probably have both, but I would feel better relying on the dog than I would an alarm system. But and something else, this is an embarrassing thing to mention, but it's something that people may want to think about, is how you are dressed or not dressed, and the availability of clothing if something happens in the middle of the night. Because, I live by myself. I'm single. I live by myself with the cats. They don't care. So I was not exactly wearing anything when this happened. So here I am standing there naked with a gun in this person's face. And then after I dialed 911, because of the other incident, I knew my house was going to be crawling with cops. Most of them are male, and a lot of them younger. It's like, I don't want to traumatize these poor guys. And so when I was during the confrontation, when I backed up against the dresser, I managed to reach in and pull out some clothes and get something on while trying to deal with the gun and not shoot myself or Christina. So from that point on, I made sure that I have something like a robe right there that I can put on in case something happens, so I'm not doubly disadvantaged.
That's a great point. It's not just clothing. It's also like, you know what? If I got to be outside my boxer briefs with a gun in the back of somebody's head while the cops get here, I'll do it. What I don't want to do is have to get into an engagement or get outside of my property with bare feet. That's a weakness. So like I have a decent pair of shoes that are slip on, and they sit at the side of my bed where if I roll out of that bed and I put my feet down, they're there and I can get them on without looking. I can feel them and get them on, because that's something a lot of people don't think of is, well, if you're in bed, you're probably not geared up the way you are when you go outside, right? So it's one thing to arm yourself and all. You probably don't have time to go putting a lot of clothing on, but yeah, shoes to me, like that was like something like when I first started thinking more about being prepared if I had something go on in the house, and it wasn't just invasion. It was like, what if there's a fire, right? If I have to run outside because fire is raging, barefoot and outside don't work, especially in Texas. Everything here bites you, stings you, or stabs you, right? Like that's just the way things are. And so that's a really good point, is to be thinking about how you can clothe yourself, protect yourself, etc., against elements, not just the individual. And again, if you get into some sort of a conflict, somebody breaks in your house, they're probably wearing clothes. They probably have shoes on. And if you get into a conflict with somebody, you're struggling over a gun, and that person's got bare feet and you're wearing a pair of boots, it takes one good stomp and you're busting metatarsals in the foot, right? So like that's actually a really astute point, thinking about clothing and other materials that you might need if you have to respond to that type of a situation.
Oh yeah, for sure. And fortunate, and the weather too, like living in Texas, if it's the middle of the winter, you might freeze your butt off. Florida didn't really have that issue, even though this was February when it happened. Still, I'm not going to be overly cold if I have to go outside. But yeah, definitely. And if you lived up north somewhere and this happened in the wintertime, that would be really bad news.
Yeah. And you mentioned law enforcement. It wasn't glowing. It wasn't awful. What was your overall feeling like of how they handled the situation? It sounds like, at least on the initial arrival, they were in touch with 911 dispatch. They understood you were armed. They understood you were sending the bad person out first, right? They didn't try to like overly control it. They didn't come kicking doors in. So it seems like that they did, as well as you could expect. How do you feel about what they did after the fact? Like as far as investigation, it doesn't seem like there was any resolution. Did this woman get charged? Like what happened?
The night that it happened, or early morning, this was about 3:00 in the morning. After it was over with, I was really pretty shaky and was kind of out of it as far as paying attention to what they were doing. And when the woman said that she came in through the garage door, I had the big, of course, the roll garage door that the car comes in. Then over on the side, there's a door like for a person to walk in. Earlier that day, I'd been out in the yard working, and I thought, okay, I left the garage door open when I came in, like I didn't lock it. That's what I thought she meant. And so I didn't think anything of it until after the cops left and I'd calmed down a little bit, and I was looking around the house, and I looked at that garage door, and I saw where it was all dented up, where it was obvious that somebody had jimmied that door. All I had done is turn the bolt in the doorknob. I had not done the deadbolt lock, and so they jimmied that door open. The cops put in their report that the door was unlocked. And so I called the guy, like the officer in charge, back the next day and told him that the door had obviously been jimmied, that it wasn't unlocked, and of course that might make a difference in the charge. I don't know enough law, but whether, it might make a difference whether somebody walked in through an unlocked door versus jimmying the door open to break in.
I'm not a lawyer, but I'm guessing it probably wouldn't make a difference in the actual charge, but it would be what we'd call an aggravating circumstance on the charge. So you might get harsher treatment because you actually physically opened the door. It might actually add a charge. I'm really not sure, but it would definitely be at least an aggravating circumstance. And getting that wrong, that's not competent. I'm sorry.
Right. But they were very nice. And again, they didn't shoot me. Anytime I hate to be this way, but anytime I have an interaction with law enforcement and I'm not beat up, tased, or shot, or arrested, I consider that a successful encounter. And none of those things happened. And they were very nice, but competent, not so much. And, they spent a lot of time standing out in the yard talking to each other, and people roaming through my house doing I don't know what. Again, I was kind of out of it, but they were there for 2 hours. They were like I counted at one point 5 cop cars in front and beside my house, and people roaming everywhere, and they didn't see that. That's what was so bad. It's not like they were short-staffed. It's not like they were rushed. So it was gross incompetence. It's almost like that they had their person, so they didn't really feel the need to investigate, maybe that they were just going through the motions.
Yeah. And that's really stupid, because it is often the case that you'll catch somebody like this. I've worked enough with law enforcement to know some things like this. You'll catch a person like this, and it seems like a really simple, like this person went in because they wanted to grab a few things and make a few bucks and get some dope or something. And if you actually pull on that thread and start investigating that, all of a sudden you find the friend. And then when you actually investigate the friend and just say there's nothing we can do, you find that there may be connected to other people. And sometimes I know of one instance where basically this led to another thing, and then another place, and then they went to this other guy's house and they opened the garage, and like all the shit that's been stolen from the neighborhood for the past 3 months is in this, like he's fencing it literally out of his garage. Mm-hmm. And they take down this whole ring because the cops weren't lazy. You got your person, but who is that person connected to? This is one of my soapbox moments for like private security that would actually do their job or they get fired. But that's neither here nor there with this situation. But that is one of those instances where, yeah, you got your person, but who is that person and who are they connected to? Was it what it looked like or wasn't it? Because now as soon as you tell me the door was Jimmy, I got a different vibe on this, right? If that person comes by and checks the doorknob and it happens to turn and they look around and they sneak in, scum. But that's one level of criminal. Someone that carried what was necessary to the house to jimmy the door is like okay, the idea that maybe they were confused, maybe they thought they know who lived there. No, if I know who lives in a place, I knock on the door, I ring the bell, right? If I don't think they're home, maybe I check the door and maybe I feel free letting myself in if I know them well enough. My best friend, I wouldn't jimmy their freaking door open. So now that has me going, not only was it incompetent, but this probably was something more. This probably was not two girls that got drunk at a bar, smoked a little meth, and wanted more. This was probably something a little bit more organized. And what I've seen, because a lot of people probably listened to the beginning of this and said, oh, it was a woman. And then the whole sense of danger goes down. A lot of what these criminal gangs are doing now, they recruit women to do this level of work. They know they get more likely to get a slap on the wrist. They're less, perceived as a threat, etc. So they're basically running this type of operation and using, women who are more disarming to do kind of the dangerous work. For all maybe there was a guy that actually was the one that jimmied the door. Maybe the other chick got cold feet and hauled ass. And that guy, they just don't mention him. Like, all of that, I'm not saying any of that's true. All I'm saying is there's no way to know if it's something like that, because if you didn't notice the door jimmied, you didn't do your job. You had 5 cop cars sitting there for this simple scenario where they already had the person in custody. Sounds like a slow night in the donut shop was out of leftovers, is what it sounds like to me.
Right. Exactly. And what you say about women kind of being almost like a decoy, I remember, I think it was in Furfal, the guy in Argentina, when he was writing about the situation in Argentina when he lived there. And even like young girls, like teenage girls, would come and knock on somebody's door. And then a whole gang, if somebody answered the door, a whole gang of people would show up and do whatever it was that they wanted to do. So, yeah, the fact that the cops didn't really investigate it was kind of disturbing to me. But again, I wasn't shot, wasn't arrested, so success in a way.
Definitely success in a way. And the decoy thing is real too. We had, back when I lived in Pennsylvania, we had that going on. It was just almost a Bonnie and Clyde thing, where it was a pretty attractive young girl would pull the car over, pop the hood up, and when someone would stop to help, boyfriend would come out from behind the trees with a gun and they'd shake the person down for whatever they had. And that went on for quite a while. Somebody actually ended up getting shot. They didn't get killed, but they did get injured because they fought back. And the boyfriend got injured. So the boyfriend was able to shoot the guy that was defending himself, but he was also able to turn the gun around and shoot the assailant. They jump in the car and haul ass. But of course, when you've got a bullet in your leg, you tend to eventually seek medical care, and that's how they got caught. They went a few cities away and thought maybe they could get into a hospital and not be found, and they made something up about he shot himself with his own gun, made a mistake, and cops did do their job, and they got arrested. It turned out they had done this to like a good 20-odd people across the state before they got caught. So people need to always think that way, man. Criminals are not as dumb as there is a show called America's Dumbest Criminals. They're not the majority of people. There's a lot of sophistication that goes on in this. And what I find too is a lot of these people have been to prison, and if they're not educated when they go, they're educated when they come out.
Yeah. Now, one thing that the cops did do is, and I did my own research on this woman once I found out her name. I could not find any arrest record for her whatsoever. The cops told me that she had never been arrested before. So I think that the one who was in my house, at least, had just made some unfortunate friends. And I found out that she did live kind of in my neighborhood, a few streets over. So she was definitely within walking distance of my house, which is kind of another bizarre thing. And the house, it was a decent looking house, well kept, nice vehicle, dog in the yard or whatever. So it was just a really bizarre thing for me to have that type of person breaking in my house. But one thing, when the cops were there, right before they left, one thing I found that was very interesting is that the officer in charge asked me why I didn't pull the trigger. I was kind of surprised. And he said, because I would have. And I said, I was trying not to say any more than I had to, because again, I have a healthy either respect or fear of the cops and saying too much. So I just said, well, she was complying and doing everything I said, so I didn't feel the need to. But what was going through my mind is, I don't want to be arrested and go to prison. Now, Florida, very gun-friendly state, but this, Pinellas County where I lived is kind of a political leaning the other direction. But fortunately, the police department and the sheriff's office, which answered my call, seemed to be on board with, the gun ownership of the citizens. But I thought that was kind of strange that the police guy asked me why I didn't shoot. And of course, being female, I'm thinking blood and guts all over my house, sheetrock torn up. What if I, miss and hit one of the cats that's, in my house, all of this stuff. You can't help but some of that bizarre stuff going through your mind while this is happening too. But the main thing was,
go ahead.
I don't want to be arrested if I can help it. And I don't really want to kill somebody if I can help it.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that. This was a traumatic experience. You've kind of alluded to this with having some trouble sleeping and all. What are kind of your long-term impacts on this? And have you had any counseling or talked through it with somebody or anything like that?
Well, the morning that it happened, about 5 o'clock in the morning, after my house had kind of cleared out, I did call a friend of mine who is a psychologist. She is retired now. She worked at the VA, or I think she was retired at that time. Anyway, a lot of experience working with people who have traumatic experiences, much more so than my experience in a lot of cases. So I did talk to her. And she said, one of the best things you can do is talk about it. And so I did. I would tell all of my friends, I would tell people about it. And me being me, when I was telling her about it, of course, I picked up on the funny parts of it, like a middle-aged woman in my house with a coffee cup, like just wandering through like it's her house, and me being buck-ass naked while this happens. I mean, that's hilarious if you think about it. And so I would tell people, and I would bring out the funny parts of it. And she said that was, one of the best things that I could do. And she offered to let me stay at her house, as did other friends. I'm like, no, I have to live here. But no, seeking counseling past that, I have not. I just figured that eventually it would go away. And what I need to do is get my act together and get better security and probably get a dog, because to me, that is the answer. And it's not like I'm afraid of the situation once I'm awake. It's like I will either handle it or I won't handle it. It's that just waking up and being in the middle of something, like somebody right in front of me and me not having reaction time, is what is so scary to me. It's not like I am afraid of the actual situation, if that makes any sense. Because again, I will either handle the situation or not handle it.
It makes perfect sense, because when you're asleep is when you're vulnerable, and when you're in that space between awake and sleep is when you're vulnerable. When you're awake, you're conscious, you can deal with the situation, and then you're also in the unknown. And you're great, horror writers and sci-fi writers and stuff. They know the thing you don't know is the thing you're most afraid of. If you look at Stephen King, he's probably one of the masters of that genre. Almost all his movies, you got to let go. If you read the books, You don't find out what the actual thing is that's the actual dangerous thing till well into it, because the mind is likely to make the risk greater than it is, or give you more fear than the actual thing. The thing under your bed when you were a kid is what scared you. You know, it was there, nothing, but it didn't matter because it was in your head. So it makes perfect sense that you feel that way. And that's why I think a dog is a great security tool, because the dog will wake up like that. And the dog will go to work. Like, the dog will not wait for you, right? The dog will go start taking care of things. I have kind of a different type of dog than you know, we mentioned Joel already, but you know, I have the kind of dog that removes your arm, like, and then, you know, the cops can come follow the blood trail, and that's the way that you shouldn't have broke in the house. And you know, I particularly, like you mentioned, being a woman at home alone, on the rare occasions that I travel without Dorothy, having that dog here, I don't think that makes, you know, nothing bad will happen. I think I feel a lot more comfortable in that situation, because if you have an armed invader, let's be honest, because the dog is not afraid to engage, the dog's pretty easy to take out. Like, if the person's willing to fire a shot, like, you can take a dog out pretty quick. But even in that scenario, I'd hate to lose my dog, but that gives myself or my wife or both of us more time to respond. And then I also know what I'm dealing with, right? You shoot my dog, you're getting shot. Like, we're not talking about it. We're not having a long conversation. We're not waiting for 911 to show up. I'm assuming if you killed anything in my home, you mean to kill me too. And you know, I hate that to happen. I'd hate for my dog to give his life to defend this family, but knowing that he would is comforting.
Right. And I totally lost my train of thought. Something you said I was going to follow up on. Oh, well, it will come back. Oh, yes, about the investigation or the lack thereof. The investigation or the lack thereof. One thing that is disturbing about this whole situation is the first time I woke up with somebody in my house, I still don't know if somebody was really in my house, or if, because of the sleep deprivation that I had been having, whether it was like waking insomnia, waking hallucinations, where even though I was awake, I was kind of not awake. There is a thing that I looked up, and I don't remember all of the details now because it's been a while, but I still don't know if this woman had somehow managed to get in before, or if maybe that was just a hallucination from whatever reason, because I've never had anything like that before. I've never not been able to tell the difference between reality and a dream. Never. So that's just a big question mark. And the cops didn't, I told them about that other situation, and even I called on my own to the officer in charge of the first time, and then told them about it when they actually arrested the woman. But I never followed up to see if they had done anything. I just assumed they hadn't, and it wasn't worth my time to try to push them to do any investigation. Like, when they were there the first time, they checked for fingerprints, or said they did. To kind of check and see if any of the fingerprints that they found in my house belonged to Christina. I doubt that they did it. And again, I didn't follow up because, again, the less I have to do with cops, the better, in my opinion.
Yeah. Or were there any other things that maybe we missed, some lessons that you've taken from this that you want to kind of finish up with?
One thing that I think people may underestimate is the need for self-defense training without a weapon. And this is something that is on my list for 2022. I've looked at some things on video, but because of the COVID stuff, the place that I wanted to go and actual have training, and I'm not talking about some martial arts thing, although that's fine. I'm talking about like elbow in the nose, knee in the crotch, stomp on the feet, whatever, poke in the eyeballs, like real self-defense training where you know how to do things maybe that the person is not expecting. I think that is something that most people should do, because you never know what situation you're going to be in and how fast people can move when motivated to do so. And even if you are armed, you may not be able to get to your gun before somebody has their hands around your neck. So that's just an idea, especially for females,
I think
because
it's
I
incredibly
know.
important for two reasons. The number one scenario you're going to have as an armed citizen is going to be exactly what you had, a home invasion, right? You're in your home. You have no, you can say we have no duty of retreat in Castle Doctrine Estates or whatever, but you have a means of retreat. In most instances, you have space to work with. If you're in a building and you're in a home, it's an incredibly restricted space. A large room in a home today is 12 by 12. Covering, like you say, the speed, covering 10 feet is instantaneous.
Mhm.
And if you're not already drawn, the time it takes you to bring that gun up, I can be on your hands. The other
Mhm.
side of that is if you're in this scenario, it's a gunfight because you brought the gun. So even if the assailant is unarmed, now the gun is up for grabs. And if you're not trained and you're not willing to commit when you have to commit, the gun actually becomes a detriment. If I'm willing to attack you when you're armed and you're not willing to pull the trigger, you just armed me. Right now,
Right.
there is a psychology on the bad guy's side going, how do I know if this person's going to shoot me or not? And I'll tell you, like, people that say, well, like, if you don't look afraid, the person that scares me with a gun is the one like this. This person scares the
Mhm.
shit out of me because they may
Yeah.
not even want to shoot me, but I might get shot, right? The person that's calm, I'm not necessarily dropping my guard or anything, but I'm actually less afraid of the person that's calm with a weapon than the person that's freaked the hell out, because we may not be able to have a discussion that brings down and de-escalates the situation. You also made me think of something. I was checking to be sure, and I'm going to check again real quick right here so I get the right number. The number of the episode is 1094. If somebody wants to look up a past episode of the Survival Podcast, which is when I had Masada Yub on, and he does an entire course on if you shoot, what do you do after the fact? And I think the fact that you didn't have to do that here is great. But, imagine that you did have, man, this person was armed. It was a guy with a knife or a sharpened screwdriver, and you shot him. Like, you were probably in one of the friendliest states you could be. If you're in your home and that happens, you still never know. And there's certain
Right.
things you don't do. In that interview, he said, like, there was a guy, he kept having his pawn shop broken into. So he slept there one night. Somebody broke in, he shot him. Well, the thing he did that almost ended up putting him in jail, what was a good shoot otherwise, was he called 911 and his first words were, I got one of the son of the bitches. Right?
Oh yeah.
What you say after the fact is as important as the circumstances, or maybe even more important. So I think that's another thing people need to think about is, the aftermath of a shooting if you're going to be armed.
Right. And let's face it, me being a middle-aged female, they would be a lot less likely, I think, to arrest me than they would maybe you, or especially a younger guy, or
Agreed.
heaven forbid, if it's a younger African American guy. It might have turned out very different, even in a gun-friendly state, because of who was pulling the trigger, even though the circumstances otherwise are totally the same.
Agreed. And we have a pretty cool comment here. I think this is another thing people need to think about from a home defense standpoint is mention of a high-powered flashlight. Like, blinding someone is incredibly effective. And it also illuminates for you what's going on. I get a very clear view of the bad guy, and they don't get a view of me, so they don't know what they're dealing with. There is an offside to that, though. If you're in a multiple invader situation, you've definitively identified your location, so it's a balancing act. But it is in most cases it's one of those things that's good to have. And they mentioned having one that's weapons mounted, and I think for the home defense handgun or shotgun, that is a very good idea. I don't carry a gun with a light on it when I'm out carrying concealed carry, because it's another thing on the gun, and I have a light anyway, and I I don't want to be like looking for my keys. So I pull out, my gun and like, oh, there's my keys. Right. But for the dedicated home defense weapon, that way, when you pick the gun up, you have the light. I think that's a very solid suggestion. And this interview is actually making me think maybe we need to do a show on like all the things that you can do in this scenario. So I appreciate you being with us today. Was there anything else that you wanted to talk to folks about before we wrapped up? We're pretty close to an hour here on the interview.
Yes. One more thing. The insurance, I can't remember now, that there are 2 companies that I know of that you can pay them a certain amount of money and they will defend you if you are in the situation where you do have to defend yourself. I have that. Again, right now, I can't remember the name of the company, but I've seen another one advertised and I've heard good things about those. But I don't really know since I didn't have to pull the trigger, but that's something that people might want to consider as well.
Yeah, there's, I think Liberty Defense is one, and there's another one. And I believe that there's a certain amount of that type of insurance that comes along with an NRA membership. I'm not sure about that anymore. The NRA is not, I'm not exactly pleased with them at this point. So I'm not totally up to date on what they offer anymore. I'm a lifetime member. So I'm not going to undo that, but I haven't really stayed abreast because I do not feel that they've been doing the work for us that they're supposed to do for us. And I've also kind of, as you know, as a listener, kind of turned away from political solutions as well.
Right.
But yeah, I think that's probably good advice, that you have some sort of legal protection. If nothing else, this is something I think everybody should have. You should have a lawyer. Maybe you're not like a big wig, you're not on retainer or anything, but a lawyer that would be your lawyer if you needed a lawyer. And in any situation that you're in, when the police want to talk to you, beyond like one thing Mossad was really big on with his shooting aftermath thing was, you don't, when the cops show up, say, I'm not going to say anything at all. You make a very specific series of statements. And when you get to the end of the last one, you say, and I will be happy to confer with you further after I've conferred with counsel. And then after that, you shut up. Because if you shoot somebody breaks in your house and when they get there, you're like, I'm not talking. That's not really the way to handle that situation. He said there are times that's exactly what you should do, but this is not one of them. You've got a guy who's the bad guy doing a really good, I think the way he put it was, he's doing a really good job right now of impersonating a victim. Right. So like there needs to be a definitive, I was in imminent fear of my life. I shot Senator Mass to stop the attack, and I will be happy to confer with you after I confer with counsel further. And if they say anything other than okay, the next words are you denying me counsel? Right. And then you keep saying that until they say, no, we're not. And then you get with your, and like, if nothing else, you should have that lawyer in your phone and say, look, I need advice. And even if they go, look, I'm your lawyer, I handle shit like, your neighbor is suing you. I'm not right for this. Most lawyers know other lawyers, and they'll say, let me put you in touch with somebody, because there's your insurance, is having someone that knows the law and knows when to shut up and what to say and what not to say.
Right.
And also the police knowing I'm not messing around. Like we're not going to go talk for 5 hours so that I don't look guilty. Like, I had a cop one time say something to me like, do you know what kind of people talk to lawyers instead of the police? And my response was, yes, smart ones. Literally smart ones. That's the comment, right? Not guilty ones, smart ones, because there's no advantage. And I've had lawyers on it flat out say there is no benefit to you by talking to the police, even when you're the one that's been attacked or whatever. If there's any indication whatsoever that they might be interested in what you have to say in a not so good way for you, that you don't benefit ever by speaking to them without an attorney. So I would add that. I appreciate you being on today. I think we got a really great amount of feedback from the audience in the live feed. That's always a good indicator that we have a great discussion. And I think this is something that, this makes people realize that it can happen. And I think that, you can look at this and say, well, like some stupid chick walked in your house with a cup of coffee. That doesn't matter. The point here is, this is your home. These walls are your walls. These doors and windows are and somebody violated that space. And I personally believe there is no time in which that occurs unless it is a true mistake in, I thought I was at my friend's house, or they were, somebody coming home that you didn't expect. Unless it's something like that, like there is no time that person doesn't mean me or you or whoever's home they're in harm, because why else would you be in my home? And I don't necessarily mean that means that they want to bash my brains in while I sleep with a bag of doorknobs or something. They mean me harm. They're looking to steal from me. They're taking from me. Mm-hmm. And I think it would be a good idea for the average person in this audience. I know there's a lot of people, such as myself. We've had a lot of training. Some of us had military or law enforcement training, plus follow-on TAC training, and we're pretty sure we can look after ourselves. That doesn't mean that we're prepared for this, because I don't think you ever can be, because it is likely to happen at the worst possible time, like when you're taking a shower, right? Or have you. So like doing things like ensuring you have double locks on your doors and that they're locked, and you make it more difficult, and doing things to dissuade people in the first place. Like if I'm actually doing this for profit, I'm looking at houses before I'm going in them. I'm not randomly going into houses unless, they left the garage door open or something, right? Like I'm figuring out, like, where am I least likely to get shot? Where am I most likely to get in and out undetected? And where am I most likely to score the best score? So taking those things away, or presenting a different image, just like you don't want to be the person walking through kind of the dark alley that looks like this, right? You want to be the person walking through the dark alley where your head's on a swivel, because the bad guy's looking for a victim. And you have to think of your property as the victim here, right? That's because they're not casing you. You're inside your house, brushing your teeth or eating a steak. They don't see you so much. They see the home. And so just as you would try to not make yourself look vulnerable out in public, you need to make your home, what can be seen of it, not look vulnerable or a good target. So with all that in mind, I appreciate you for being here. It stirred some pretty interesting thoughts on my end, and I think we'll be diving into this before the end of the year. I think I'll put something together on it. And so thanks for a great show today, and thanks for helping us, with an idea for a show we probably haven't done in a long time. We probably should.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Jack, and I hope it has been helpful for some people, and I look forward to your show next time.